What's to stop a public body from hiding records they don't want disclosed with lower level employees?
Public school teacher is not a public body. The public body itself is the school, right? So who else is holding and creating the record? Well, the employees are creating the records, always, in every case.
In our last teacher's contract that we approved, it basically said that educators can teach whatever they want in the class as long as they think that it is relevant to impacting humanity at large. I remember at the time I talked about it at the board meeting. I said, I just don't think this is a good idea. Unnecessarily puts a cloud of suspicion over our teachers. Most teachers just want to do their jobs and teach students the right way. They don't want to be imposing their beliefs on their classes when it comes to politics or religion or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's the sort of thing that just creates distrust.
So it's Carol Beth Litkouhi, right?
Yes.
I'm saying, okay. I so everybody knows I had to send Carol Beth a email asking her to phonetically spell her last name just to make sure that I didn't totally butcher it, which I'm quite certain that I would have.
You did a brilliant job.
Yeah, thank
great.
you so much. Well, thank you so much for coming on Unlocking the Law. We're fortunate to have you. You're sort of a high profile. I know the school board trustee maybe wasn't like the sexiest of local elected positions up until very recently. I feel like with the COVID era, like it sort of ushered in like a new level of sort of prestige for being on the local school board. What do you think about that?
It certainly opened up a lot of people's eyes to the fact that we need people to run for these school boards because they make a lot of really important decisions for our kids.
Apparently so, and I think we're going to get a little bit more into that in a moment here. So first, I don't know, do you just want to introduce yourself, like your personal, professional background, and just kind of tell people a little bit about who you are and why they should care that you're on Unlocking the Law with Brandon Grisco?
Sure. Well, I'm a mom of 2 kids. And I have degrees in music education and flute performance, and then I got a master's degree in reading and language arts. So I've worked with students and families for a long time in lots of different kinds of capacities. When it comes to the school board, I was like many parents, and my eyes were also opened in the 2020-21 timeframe. Yeah. And for me, it was when the district launched this new ethnic and gender studies class, and I wanted to see the curriculum. And it seemed to me like that was a pretty basic request. But when I asked to see it, instead I was told to file FOIA requests. And then they denied that any material existed, like readings or assignments, even though the class had been going on for about 6 months. So that was my first glimpse into a larger problem. And I started digging deeper and attending school board meetings and chatting with people. And I discovered lots of important decisions that were affecting students and their families were being made without meaningful public discussion about it. There was a lot of hiding going on. And they removed some advanced classes from the middle schools, and it just quietly disappeared. It was during an unrecorded board work session. And I noticed our SAT scores were declining and our enrollment was declining. And parents who spoke out about this stuff were actually being targeted. They, some were receiving cease and desist letters from the administration. Wow. Some were actually, their employers were being called by administrators, and one mom even lost her job. And our district had to settle a lawsuit with her about that. So wow. I was shocked. There was a lot of stuff happening that I was not familiar with because, my kids were they were having a good time in their classroom with their teacher. Kidding. I didn't know what was going on at that level.
So did you ever like expect that you would be sort of one of these like NIMBY? Well, NIMBY's not really the right word, but it's sort of like in the same vein, like people that sort of show up and are kind of like annoying at board meetings and things like that. Like, did you ever expect that was going to be your life?
Not at all. I have done a complete 180. I've always been a pretty agreeable person, actually, for the most part. So
I suspect there's some school administrators that would disagree with that assessment.
Yeah, things have. I know that there are a lot of people with a lot of different views on me at this point, but I had never really been tested the way that I was when I started attending these board meetings, and eventually I just started thinking some of this stuff going on, this is just wrong, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. So I reached out to the board for help. And that's when I discovered that the people on the board were largely silent about what was going on. And it was just one of those things where I was like, I'm not going to just complain on the sidelines. We need people to run for board. And I was encouraged to run for board. And I never thought I'd be doing it, but here we go.
Good. All right. Rock and roll. Well, let's get into it. So that's how you ended up running for the school board.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you maybe a little bit more about that in a little bit, because I'm kind of curious for somebody that's just kind of brand new getting into politics, so to speak, what that was like running for office and things like that. Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. So I just a couple of quick things on your background. So just the types of things that you were into. I don't know. I mean, maybe things sort of more traditionally associated with kind of a more liberal sort of or left-leaning. Do you kind of identify as, I mean, and if you don't want to say that's fine too, but do you sort of identify as liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, any of those labels? Or do you sort of stay away from that?
The truth is I've moved around quite a bit. I mean, I used to be quite liberal, actually. And now I'm discovering that I have more conservative values as time has gone on, where I'm seeing, but honestly, I see problems with both extremes on both ends of the spectrum. So I don't know. I guess in a lot of ways I would say I'm probably an independent thinker, but I don't know. Generally speaking, when I'm looking at a lot of the issues I'm seeing now, people tend to view me as conservative based on where I stand.
But you wouldn't necessarily label yourself that way anyhow.
I don't know. I think it's fair to say I probably have conservative values.
Yeah, fair point. Good. Okay. Well, I try to stay like somewhat agnostic in sort of my like public life. I'm an attorney, so I always kind of joke like we're like mercenaries. If somebody wants to hire us to do a thing, like as long as it's not immoral or repugnant or something like this, like there's a good chance we're going to do it. Depending on if we have the skill set and things like that. So I've frequently found myself on both sides of different issues, which is one of the things I actually think is helpful about sort of the training that you have to go through to become an attorney, looking at both sides of issues.
Yes.
Because, just as an example, like we've represented employees in lawsuits before. We've also had to defend, sort of corporate interests in those types of discrimination lawsuits or whatever. So we've seen both sides of that. And I think it does kind of make you more well-rounded generally when you can see both sides of things. But although I am, I think anybody that knows me is going to say like, yeah, Brandon's more conservative, which is true. But as far as like my professional and sort of public-facing life, it's just not that relevant, I guess, for the most part.
Actually,
I don't see it as being super relevant. But
with the school board, I mean, really, most of the stuff we deal with are supposed to be nonpartisan kinds of issues that you would think that liberal and conservative people could agree upon, actually. And I do strongly believe that regardless of what my personal values and opinions are when it comes to political topics, it's important that schools remain a neutral place that respect, the rights of everyone who attends them, whether you're liberal or conservative. And that's been something we've been struggling with, actually, on our school board, with political activism being thrust into the classroom. And I believe it's important, in order to be neutral, to try to keep the politics out of it and focus on education and just being transparent with everyone so you can see what's going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's certainly the purpose of the Freedom of Information Act, which we're definitely going to talk about, because, the whole point of that and the Open Meetings Act, when they both came around, was to, give people insight into the inner workings of government and how decisions are made and things like that. And I think that's pretty explicit in both the case law and in the text of the laws themselves. Just quickly, though, if you could, what was it like running for office as like a nonpartisan, I guess inexperienced in a way, like non-political operative, just maybe like a few paragraphs or so on that.
Well, it was a lot more contentious and political than you might expect, actually. I ran in 2022, and it was a growing experience. It was, I don't regret anything, actually. I feel really thankful to have gone through the process. It's really taught me to have a thicker skin than I used to have, for sure. And it's taught me about like what principles I stand for. It has opened me up because, prior to doing this, I was more of an introvert, to be honest. I was fairly shy. And this forces you to really come out of your shell and just try to meet people and talk to people and to get to know your neighbors and your community in ways that I never had done before. And I've met so many wonderful, interesting, good people through this process who are much smarter than I am and who have, helped me to acquire a lot of knowledge that I never had before. And I really love that about this experience. But there's definitely been a lot of attacks, too, where people will say, oh, she's questioning what's going on. She's trying to destroy public education. That's clearly her motive. She wants to destroy the community where she lives. It's really crazy, the kind of stuff that people will say.
Yeah, no kidding. So what was it, a crowded field when you ran? Was there a primary? I mean, just kind of...
No, they don't have primaries. It was just for the general election. Although... Let me think. There were 2 6-year seats when I ran and 1 2-year seat. And in the 6-year seats, for those 2, I think there were 4 of us that were running.
Okay. So what do you think it was that differentiated you from the other candidates? I mean, why do you think you got picked over them?
I worked really hard.
That's a big part of it.
Trying to get my message out, and I had a lot of people who were helping to try to do that too. We did a lot of door knocking. We did a lot of events. Mm-hmm. We just tried to encourage people to spread the word. And it was difficult. It was an uphill battle because some of my opponents, they had, PACs that were kind of working on their behalf.
Lots of funding, sure. It's very expensive, I'm sure, yeah.
Yes. When it came to the funding, I was largely, by far, most of my funding came from our local residents rather than political groups. And so we just had to work really hard.
So by the time you were running, were you already kind of known as a rabble-rouser at the school board?
I would say that's fair to say.
Pretty much.
I've been attending school board meetings and speaking regularly.
Yeah, and the types of things that you were speaking about, was it all transparency related, or were there other concerns that you were raising?
Some of my main issues were academic and enrollment based concerns. In fact, one of the things I would say all the time was we need to stop the decline, because our SAT scores at that time had fallen, I think, like 85 points. It was just ridiculous. And we were losing students. And I was saying things like, we need to investigate this. This is a problem. It shouldn't be this way. I grew up in Rochester schools, and I moved back to this area so that I could put my kids through these wonderful public schools where I got such a good education. So we need to figure out why this is happening so that we can turn it around.
Mm-hmm. And did you say also enrollment was a piece of this too?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So what do you attribute to the decline in enrollment? I mean, is it people going to private school, or is it just the case that people have way less kids now than they used to?
Our administration likes to talk about how birth rates are declining. And I know that that's a problem, and that's something that's going on in the state of Michigan. But one thing that's unique about the Rochester area is that people keep moving here, people with school-age kids. And I became friends with some people who introduced me to, sites like SEMCOG, where you can go and you can figure out what is the school-age population, ages 5 to 17 who live in your district. And what is the trend? What did that look like over the years? And you can compare that with our enrollment trend. And the truth is our population has been growing year after year after year. It's really just the percentage of kids that attend Rochester schools that has been declining. So it's people choosing to go elsewhere. And eventually, when I was on the board, we were starting a strategic plan. We sent out a strategic plan survey, and we asked families a question. For those of you who pulled your kids and send them to somewhere else, why are you pulling your kids? And I remember some of the top responses on that survey was lack of academic rigor, class sizes being too big, woke ideology in the classroom, and a distrust of upper leadership at the administration and board level. So parents were telling us, what was going on and why they're pulling their kids. So
right now, I don't know if it's just the nature of the type of people that tend to want to speak at public meetings. But this is probably the third, I would say, interview that I've done with somebody where local government transparency was like a major issue for them. So I don't know if that's a trend or if it's just sort of indicative of the sort of person that wants to speak at a public meeting, maybe a little bit of both. But I do think there seems to be an uptick in sort of transparency related concerns with respect to how local government is functioning, how they're spending money, how they're making decisions about, whatever else is going on.
Absolutely. I think that is something that's been going on. People are noticing more of it. And if we want to restore trust with the public, we do need to be more transparent about what's going on. For instance, when I asked to see class curriculum, just show the class curriculum. Why are we trying to hide it?
I want to get into that so bad because I found this. So I am a municipal attorney. I represent local governments. As I've said, I also represent, citizens and such at times and whatnot too. I've taken matters at times adverse to municipalities. So I've kind of done a little bit of both. FOIA, it seems to me, is pretty clear. If it's a public record and there's a definition in the statute of what a public record is, then, you pretty much have to produce it with limited exemptions. And they're pretty strict exemptions. And the courts have basically said over the years that if you want to exempt material, you have to sort of read it very strictly, make sure that your exemption is legit, and you only redact that information which is subject to the exemption. So you may have to partially redact and partially disclose and different things like this. So I guess I want to get into maybe just kind of break it down piece by piece. So you already kind of said you hear about this class. I think it was like a race and gender class or something. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, ethnic and gender class, yeah.
Okay, ethnic and gender class. So what is it about the class that made you want to find out more about what they were teaching?
Well, honestly, it sounds like a political hot button type of class. And I found out about
it to me.
on social media. There was a teacher, she posted some of the books that she was going to use for the class. And I was like, well, this all looks like it's coming from one side of the political spectrum. And I was thinking, something like this could even be interesting if you had both sides represented and you could engage in some debate and explore issues from multiple viewpoints. I didn't know, and I wasn't going to make assumptions about it, which is why I simply asked, can I just see what the readings and assignments look like? Are there a variety of viewpoints being represented?
Mm-hmm. But, so they didn't want to answer that, as we find out.
Yeah, they didn't give it. I was surprised when I was told to send a FOIA request, honestly. Why should I be sending a FOIA request in the first place? Why can't you just show me what the readings and assignments look like?
Right, yeah. So you did then send a FOIA request.
I did, yeah.
And
I waited until the class had proceeded for a little while, actually, and then I asked, okay, for the first 3 weeks of class, show me what readings and assignments the kids did. And nothing showed up. There were no records responsive. Okay, so then I encountered that obstacle. So I did it again a few weeks later just to see if finally they were starting to do readings and assignments. And it turns out they never gave me any readings and assignments, even though it showed up on the syllabus that there should have been readings and assignments. And that's when I just thought, nothing should be taught to students under the cover of secrecy. That principle matters.
So had you talked with your kids at all about what they were doing and learning in class to try to sort of suss out what the truth of this might be, or?
Well, I'll be honest with you. My kids weren't actually in that particular class.
I see. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So they don't, I guess they don't technically deny it. I mean, I guess it is denial, but so they just tell you like, hey, these records don't exist, right? Is that
right? No documents exist that pertain to your request.
It is hard to believe, isn't it?
It was hard to believe, yeah.
So now walk me through, how did the litigation progress? Or how did you, even before that, how did you even make a decision? Because that's a pretty extreme decision. I mean, litigation is a real pain. So how did you make a decision to say, okay, you know what? I just going to have to file a lawsuit. Like, what went into that decision-making process for you?
Well, I first wanted to follow the process. So after they denied me for the entire semester that class had gone, I sent an appeal to the superintendent at the time, and I asked him if he could rectify things and make it better, and he maintained that no records exist. Mm-hmm. Then I wrote to the board, and I asked them if they could appeal the superintendent's decision, and they were just completely silent also. And I believe in my letter to the superintendent and the board, I also mentioned, I don't want to have to seek legal recourse, but that's what I'll do if you don't provide what is due, because it just really seemed that crazy to me. And I sought help, and I reached out to the Mackinac Center. I wrote them a letter. I showed them what my FOIA requests looked like. And that's when they offered to help, because they realized how crazy this was.
Right. Yeah, no, big time. It's important to have, although candidly as a municipal attorney, sometimes they've been a thorn in my side, or not just them, but groups like them have been. But I think it is necessary, because it's so just friggin' expensive. I mean, to go out and hire a private attorney, unless it's a contingency fee case like you would find in like a personal injury case or something like that, or if there's a lawyer just looking for pro bono legal work, which sometimes we do. It's such a time commitment to go into litigation that it can really be cost prohibitive for a lot of people. Especially I live in the Livonia area. My office is in Northville. There's a kind of a mix, but a lot of people that I deal with day in and day out are sort of middle class types, right? I mean, and so to ask somebody like that to commit to protracted litigation is quite the commitment.
Yeah.
If you
and
can't
I think they helped me in this case just because it's a matter of public interest.
Oh, certainly it is. Certainly it is. So I get the sense, and to be candid with everybody, I haven't really read like the entire case, so I'm sure there's parts of what I'm asking that are explained in here. But this didn't go to trial or anything, right? This was all kind of decided on the paper, you might say. Motion practice.
Right.
Okay.
It was. And unfortunately, this case highlighted, well, first of all, in my opinion, it highlighted the importance of paying attention to which judges we elect.
Okay,
and
fair enough.
Second, it also highlighted a problem with the way that the FOIA statute is written, because ultimately they ruled that only records possessed by the public body itself are subject to disclosure, not records held by individual trustees, which brings to mind.
I've got a number of questions related to that we'll get to. First, so at the trial court level, this would have been Oakland County, right? Oakland County. Okay. So were you at the hearing for when they dismissed the case?
No.
You weren't. Okay. What was your understanding of what the trial court judge, or why the trial court judge decided like they did to dismiss the case, presumably, right?
Right. I think they just decided it was based on the way the law was written. It seems like there's a loophole just in that language. It really ought to be fixed.
Well, it's a little bit strange. So the Court of Appeals, and so you guys appeal, it goes to the Court of Appeals, and in an unpublished decision, they end up affirming the trial court's dismissal. And when you affirm, it means you just agree with what the lower court did. So the Court of Appeals affirms the trial court and basically finds that records, I don't even really know how to frame this, honestly, because it's rather unusual. But first, let me say this, that when you have appeals cases, you have two types of cases. And Carol Beth, I know you probably already know all this, so I'm kind of more speaking to the audience at this point here, if I could break the fourth wall a little bit. So you have two types of cases. You've got published and unpublished. When you have an unpublished case, it kind of means that, maybe it wasn't controversial enough, or it wasn't, for whatever reason, they didn't want to publish it. And so it's not going to be binding precedent for future appeals panels. So when you have an unpublished case, it's persuasive. A future court could look back at it, and if the facts are sufficiently similar in the cases, they can still use it as persuasive precedent, but it's not going to be binding. When you have a published opinion of the Court of Appeals, future panels will actually be bound by that decision, and they have to follow that decision unless they can distinguish it in some way. And so it seems to be the case that what the Court of Appeals is saying here is that a public school teacher is not a public body within the definition of FOIA. And since FOIA only requires the records of a public body be disclosed, that individual teachers, like lesson plans, I guess, weren't subject to disclosure. But if you take a step back and like think about that for a second, like the courts have found in other contexts that like city attorneys, for example, even city attorneys that are actually third-party contractors, that their records are subject to FOIA. routinely records that are held and created by individuals that just work for the public body are routinely disclosed in FOIA. So it's somewhat of an unusual decision, in my opinion, because it doesn't really seem like there's a limiting principle behind when you can say, okay, well, this record is clearly the individual record of an individual that is just simply employed by a public body, and even though they're using it as part of their official job duties, it's still not really a public record somehow. But then if you go into other areas of government, I think very clearly courts have ruled that those records are subject to disclosure under FOIA. So
is
the
that
court
still
does.
true? Like, I'm wondering if my case changes any of that.
Well, it's unpublished, so it doesn't. I think it invokes an interesting legal argument that that people can try and use in the future. So I may be using this argument on behalf of one of my clients, maybe to try and uphold, a denial or an exemption or something like that. But this case is from the decision was released in 2024, which is still rather recent. So I suppose that in the years to come, you will probably see this issue be litigated in more detail because it is kind of unusual. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it, is that you don't, like, the public body itself is the school, right? Well, how does the school operate? It operates through its employees. I mean,
well, yeah, they're government employees.
So who else is holding and creating the record? Well, the employees are creating the records always in every case.
And what's to stop a public body from hiding records they don't want disclosed with lower level employees?
Well, I think what the court here is saying is that it would be different if, there was some directive to create the record. They're kind of splitting hairs here. They're saying, well, if there's a directive from above to create the record, then now it's a public record. So it's just unusual. They say public school teachers are not included in the definition of public body, and therefore records created and retained by individual teachers are not public records subject to disclosure for purposes of FOIA. And then in a footnote, they say this, which to me is very telling. The posture of this case and its limited facts necessarily limits the scope of our decision. So that's a weird thing to say in a case. Anytime a court is saying on the front end that the scope of our decision is limited, what they're trying to say is that, well, the facts of this case are unique, and so the legal decision that we're reaching here are limited to these types of facts. And so it's almost like they're creating a separate rule or a separate little exception, either just for this case maybe, or for cases specifically involving schools and teachers. It's really unclear what they're doing, but anytime a court does that, it's really worth looking at, because they're saying on the front end of their decision that we really don't want this applied in other cases, is kind of what they're saying. So for an attorney reading this, that's very interesting and very telling, I think. Any reaction to that?
I find this really interesting. I'm not a lawyer, so I always enjoy hearing what different lawyers have to say about it.
Well, yeah, just think about it. You've got the case limited to its facts in a sense. Mm-hmm. And so, well, why? I mean, I would ask, I suppose, if I could interview the judges, I would say, well, why would you want this limited to its facts? If it's a sound legal principle, shouldn't it apply in any case with similar facts? Like, shouldn't it apply to a community college, a city, a township, a county that has individual employees that have individually created records, and they themselves are not a public body? Shouldn't all their individual records, even though used in their employment, now be exempt from disclosure based on the reasoning in this case? And I'd like an answer to that.
Yeah,
frankly.
what would be motivating them to? Well,
it's an interesting argument. And again, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'll get to use it someday on one side or the other. Who knows?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm hoping that the law gets rewritten so it's just very clear.
Well, and it has kind of happened before, where specifically with institutes of higher education, that they've done things and the legislature has come around and said, okay, institutes of higher education can't do that anymore, right? And so sometimes you do have a situation where there's, I don't want to call it misconduct exactly, but you've got something happens that receives some political attention and they'll change the law as a result of it. So you don't know, maybe that could happen. I mean, probably not in the current administration, but it could happen.
Well, I guess we'll find out.
So coming out of that case, I mean, obviously it's a disappointment. It's a bit of a letdown. I assume you feel like the court probably reached the wrong conclusion. Did you guys give any consideration to taking that up to the Michigan Supreme Court?
We did. We did submit it to the Michigan Supreme Court, but they did not decide to hear it.
I see. So another interesting little tidbit for my viewers is that when you go to a trial court and you get a decision, you get one what's called an appeal of right. So you have the right to appeal, and the Michigan Court of Appeals has to hear that appeal. But the Supreme Court is by leave only. So the justices on the Michigan Supreme Court get to decide whether or not to take a case and which types of cases they want to take. And oftentimes the highest court, the Supreme Court, whether it's for the United States or for the state of Michigan, they're taking on cases that have broader public policy considerations or to resolve seemingly conflicting decisions that are going on in the lower courts. So lots of times they're taking on cases like that. I think this would have been a really interesting case for the Supreme Court to take up, but hopefully this issue circulates again to where they can maybe take it up in the future. I think that'd be really interesting.
Hopefully. I heard that they often don't take cases. Do you know about how often they tend to take cases that are submitted to them versus not? Or?
I don't know the numbers on that, but I'm quite certain it's a minority. I mean, it's a fairly small minority probably because, again, any case that the Michigan Supreme Court takes on is going to be automatically binding and automatically sort of overruling any other contrary cases. So it's a pretty substantial power that they wield to interpret the law. And there's been cases where you could go back and look and say, wow, it seems like every so often we're like swinging different ways on these policy issues where the court will decide the law one way and then a number of years later they'll change course and sort of begin interpreting it a little bit different way. So I think, that can certainly happen. But that's part of the reason why they only take so many cases because, they're really kind of laser focused on correcting splits of opinion or policy issues. So do you worry about like a slippery slope here with this FOIA decision? I mean, how do you think about that now that the case is over with?
Do I worry about a slippery slope? Yeah, I do. I've noticed other things happen with our district too. Like in our last teacher's contract that we approved, they inserted this academic freedom clause in there that I think is typically more used for universities and stuff, to allow them to do research. But it basically said that, educators can teach whatever they want in the class as long as they think that it is relevant to impacting humanity at large. It was pretty vague, ambiguous language that seemed a little bit like, why are we introducing this in here? And I remember at the time I talked about it at the board meeting. I said, I just don't think this is a good idea. And it unnecessarily puts a cloud of suspicion over our teachers when most teachers just want to do their jobs and teach students the right way. They don't want to be imposing their beliefs on their classes when it comes to politics or religion or whatever. But it's the sort of thing that just creates distrust. So I don't know. And then that combined with, what happened with my FOIA lawsuit with not allowing people to see curriculum that was being used because that curriculum didn't exist in the central office. I don't know. Have
they done anything since then to correct that issue, to make it so that curriculum for classes are public records that you can FOIA?
Well, we could if we had a different board. If we had a board that was willing to create some policies and stuff, we could do something like that. But as it stands today, like I can't go to the Rochester Community Schools District and submit a FOIA for specific lesson plans or whatever. I don't think you would get anything back.
They're still individual teacher records and not public records or whatever.
Right.
You want to say. Very interesting. Is there any means by which they make these things available to parents at all?
Well, I mean, if your student is part of the class, you are supposed to be able to go to the teacher and the teacher would share what's going on in the class with you. That's my understanding.
I mean, why do you understand that?
That's what is said, but I mean,
I'm just asking. I mean, I'm your humble host, right? So I'm just curious as to why you hold that view. But
it's, sometimes you have to try things to find out. Your schools.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so now you're saying things and you're exercising First Amendment rights here on this podcast. And what is going on with Rochester schools and the First Amendment and board member free speech and different things like that? I understand there's another Carol Beth Litkouhi lawsuit hanging around out there that's a little more recent.
I get a lot of grief for these lawsuits, Brandon. It's ridiculous. But they've got to stop breaking the law. That's why this happens. So this is another lawsuit that never should have happened. And at the center of this lawsuit is this board bylaw that says that trustees are not allowed to share documents or information that the district hasn't already shared. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that, trustees should be asking permission from the administration before sharing public information with the public.
Mm. And so these are documents that somebody could FOIA or
right. It would be information that's subject to FOIA. So in my case, what happened here, the reason for my censure and everything is this. Last year, they were talking about putting a new tax proposal on the ballot for this year in August. And at first, when I heard about it, I brushed it off. I was like, I don't think this is necessarily needed, but we'll see what happens. But then toward the end of October, September timeframe, our superintendent started taking trustees in pairs and explaining the millage. Mm-hmm. And that was already kind of weird as it is, because a tax proposal is public information. And other districts were already starting to talk about it. And one district had actually already voted down putting the millage on the ballot. But we were talking about it behind the scenes in pairs. And I asked my superintendent, why are we doing it this way? Why aren't we just having a public meeting? I'd like to talk to my constituents about it. And he said,
well, if you get too many people together, then you risk having a quorum and possibly running into open meetings issues.
Oh, for board members, yes. But I was saying, why don't we have a public meeting? Why don't we just talk about this at a board
I'm
meeting?
saying in response to why would we be meeting in pairs?
Right. It was a way to get around the fact that we can't have a closed session on this topic.
You said it, not me. Okay.
So, I wanted to do that. He said that, no, he would prefer to keep it confidential at this time. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I really do believe that people have a right to know about what's going on with this tax proposal. And so I ended up writing an opinion piece about it in the Detroit News later that month.
This was before it was public that they were considering a tax proposal.
It was before the administration of Rochester schools told Rochester residents. But the truth of the matter is this countywide tax proposal was already being talked about in other districts. So the information
this is a countywide proposal, not a Rochester school specific proposal.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And it's public information. It was not confidential information. So I wrote about it, and I felt good about doing that. But my board was not happy that I did that because I talked about it too soon, according to them. And they decided to censure me for it and publicly shame me and remove me from committees.
What does a censure look like for a school board, a local school board? Is it just a vote, like a shame on you kind of vote, or what's the deal?
It's like a shame on you kind of thing. They wrote up this document, explaining all the things that they believed I did wrong, and they removed me from committees. They stripped me of my board liaison roles. But during the censure hearing itself, I was actually really touched by the community. We had about an hour of public comment, and people were coming out to support me and what I was doing and tell them how wrong this was. But that didn't stop them. They went through with it anyways. And in fact, they doubled down. The very next meeting, they decided to change another bylaw, and they said that trustees should no longer be able to request public documents that are already in the possession of the school district. Now it would require a majority vote before trustees could even just access information like that. Mm-hmm. And they also took off approving the agenda at our meetings. They didn't want people to be able to advocate for changing the agenda in any way. They took off board member comments at the end of meetings. There's been this theme of trying to suppress people from speaking when they've got differing points of view. Whether it comes down to just stopping you from accessing information in the first place so you can't speak about it, or just taking away spots on our agenda that allow you to speak about things.
Interesting. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting. So what is it, the current situation? I mean, is the current situation that you have board member comment periods or no?
No, board member comments were taken off. So I'm not supposed to be able to speak. And in fact, the board president just recently added a new section called board liaison and committee assignments. Mm-hmm. And she added this section, and then she explained that I shouldn't have anything to say during that section because of my censure.
Because you're not allowed on any committees.
I'm not allowed on committees.
Wow. Okay, so that's interesting stuff. I guess I want to ask, at what point, because I mean, I think we could agree that there certainly would be some situations where it would not be appropriate to disclose things, right? To
like
the public.
If it's confidential, right?
Sure. So like I'm thinking about, I don't know. I mean, I probably should have thought about this ahead of time, so shame on me. But I'm thinking about like, maybe the school district is purchasing real estate, and if it were to become public that you were looking at a particular piece of property, then somebody could jack up the price because they know the school district has the money to pay it or whatever.
Right.
So,
and I think that's
like,
a closed meeting topic.
Yeah, it could be. Sure. Yeah, it definitely could be. But even aside from that, like there's probably things we could think of that maybe technically is not legally confidential in the sense of like a closed meeting, but that maybe it would be better if you just didn't talk about it. I mean, do you see any room for that or no?
It would depend on the example.
Yeah. Okay, so you're open to it anyway, that there could be some situations maybe.
I am always open to learning new things.
Fair enough. Well, I won't try and pin you down because I don't have any other examples in mind. But okay, so at what point, following your censure and your removal from committee assignments, did that get publicized in some way prior to filing the lawsuit, or how did that happen?
Yeah, it did. The information spread around. I know it was spreading a lot on social media. It was in the news. Yeah. And then once I filed the lawsuit, Mackinac Center was helping me with that again. Mm-hmm. They started spreading it around too. I ended up writing an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal about it.
Really?
Also. Yeah.
Okay, so you're putting your English education to good use. That's pretty cool.
Well, I'm just trying to get the message out there, basically.
Yeah. So what kind of response? I mean, I'm glad to know that you wrote the Wall Street Journal article. I hadn't seen that. I might have to look it up. But what kind of reaction did you get to that? I mean, that's a pretty big platform.
I've been getting overwhelming positive reaction when it comes to this, because most people in the community realize, like, voters don't elect trustees to stay silent about stuff. They want trustees that will represent their interests. And there are a lot of people who are even concerned about this millage and the way that it was presented and all of that. And they want people to be able to voice, all the different opinions, whether you're for or against it. We really should be willing to have the conversation. When one side is not willing to have the conversation and they're just trying to shut you down all the time, that raises major red flags for most people, I think.
Yeah, well, it's one thing to not want to talk about something. It's a completely different thing to prevent or prohibit or adversely, act against somebody who does want to talk about it, right? I mean, those are kind of different things.
Yeah. The idea of retaliating against people and just taking away their opportunities, it's just really un-American. So
how did you go from they censured me and maybe that's upsetting or whatever to I'm going to file a lawsuit on this?
Well, it was another one of those things where I was like, they're breaking the law again. And there's no other recourse. You try to do what you can within the system. And that's what I always try to do. I've tried to work with my board colleagues behind the scenes and everything. I've tried to talk with them. I've tried to go through the process. When that doesn't work, I try to bring it to the community to let them know. And sometimes when you bring things out into the open, it actually does help to instigate change, because eventually enough people get upset about it that, they're like, okay, well, I guess we should probably do something about this at this point.
Okay.
But eventually you reach a point where it's like, I don't really know how to hold them accountable.
So I noticed, and this is actually a funny little thing that I had no idea was even possible, but the Mackinac Center, the legal foundation that's representing you in this case, they actually filed this case in the Rochester District Court.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, which is very unusual. I actually had to go look it up because I was so curious about that. Because typically, a case like this would really have no business being in a local district court, because that would have been, I presume, your Rochester local judge or whatever dealing with that at that point, right?
Well, they're able to deal with local school district issues that are like under 20, like if you're asking for under 20,000 or something.
Right, yeah,
I wasn't asking for money. I was just like, how about just change the bylaw back to what it used to be, which is says keep confidential information confidential, not public information.
So I did look up that rule, and apparently there is a rule that says that your local district courts can adjudicate school-related disputes, but nonetheless, that's now been removed because there's federal claims involved. That's now been removed.
Cheaper and faster, is my understanding.
Probably would have been. I don't know how much faster it would have been. Although, candidly, just between you and me, and you don't have to respond to this, I don't know that your local district judge really would have any idea what to do with a case like this. It may be more appropriately in federal court, but nonetheless, it is in federal court now. And what is the status of the case now? I mean, I just looked on the Mackinac Center website where they have the complaint, the notice of removal to federal court, and then the answer to the complaint. But there's no other documents on there. So do you know what's going on in the case?
Mackinac is separating out state issues from federal issues and trying to get them to decide the state issues in the state court and the federal issues in the federal court. And the district is saying, no, we don't want you to do that. So it continues to just bounce.
I got you. Okay, so maybe they've tried to partially remand the state law claims back down or something.
Right.
Very interesting. Okay, that's pretty cool. These cases don't come up all that well. I mean, they come up often enough, I suppose, but the unique sort of interesting circumstances that you find yourself in, that doesn't necessarily come up a lot. Which leads me to a question of, have you followed the Michigan State University kerfuffle at all? And are there any parallels between what's going on with Mike Balow and what is going on with you?
Oh, I find that so interesting. Yeah, I've read a few articles on there, and I feel like I would love to talk with them sometime. It's so interesting. It seems like a striking parallel. And it had to do with their code of ethics and stuff, too. And, my case, really that bylaw 1001, it's the number 4 on the code of ethics. And, gosh, so
what is the bylaw? Your bylaw, and then what is their...
Let me see if I can find
code section.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, take your time.
The bylaw says, I will take no private action that might compromise the board or administration, which is good, and will not share any document or information that has not already been shared by the district, including but not limited to confidential or privileged information. So it's that including but not limited to part that makes it so that you're not supposed to talk about. Yeah,
there's some vagaries there, some ambiguities perhaps that one could exploit. I think I would say the risk in a document worded like that would be, I think, confidential and privileged. Yeah, you probably shouldn't share that, and there maybe should even be consequences associated with that. But because it says sort of including but not limited to, it maybe sucks in some additional information perhaps. I suppose that'd be your position, right, that it sucks in too much.
Well, that's what they did, is they basically took that little part of it and they were like, yep, see, this is why we're censuring you.
Yeah. But even what was the first part of it? Something about not acting in the best interest, or what was the...
I will take no private action that might compromise the board or administration.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know what that means. I think that's the problem. I think that's the fundamental problem with, and I'm not blaming or trying to put anything on the district or whatever. I mean, it just sounds like, well, you can kind of read that, and there's a legal principle associated with this. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but when you read a regulation or something, you have to be able to know what it's prohibiting. And I'm not sure that really gives you a clear picture of what's being prohibited. That'd be the question I would have that I would want to get answered, I guess, if I had to ask the question.
And I almost wonder if it goes to this to this question of what is the role of a board member supposed to be? Because I think that is something that my colleagues and I might disagree about to some extent on the board. And I think it's something that a lot of school boards are struggling with right now. Like, who are we really supposed to be accountable to? Because I would say we were elected to serve as representatives on behalf of the community for the sake of holding public institutions to a high standard for our kids' education. And it doesn't mean you don't support the administration. It doesn't mean you should undermine them in any way at all. But it means that first and foremost, we're beholden to the community. It doesn't mean we should be rubber stamping decisions that the administration brings forward to us.
Yeah, it is interesting. And in fact, I've been kicking around the idea of writing like a journal style article about this because an elected official is elected in a fiduciary capacity in a sense.
Yes.
And the elected official holds the public trust. And so I think it is interesting because, like, for example, in the standard corporation context, your board members are fiduciaries and they have obligations to the corporation and its shareholders. And so a similar principle you could say would be that, there are obligations, of course, to the district as a I imagine it's a type of governmental corporation or something to that effect. But the shareholders, right, by analogy, are the voters essentially. And so are there duties to the general public? Maybe stay tuned, folks, for my article that I might write one day if I can ever find the time in between legal work and podcasting and being a dad myself, and all that. So, what do you think about that? I mean, what do you think? Where do you see your responsibility in that?
Well, yeah, I ultimately think that my responsibility is to the community who elected me. Mm-hmm. And I need to try to do what I can to just try to make Rochester schools as good as they can be for the sake of our students, to support our administration in doing that,
So what do you think would be, like, in a perfect world or in Carol Beth's world, what would be the way to address some of these issues? So, for example, maybe they've got a problem that you were talking about this or whatever. Like, how do you address that? If you can't censure somebody, like, what would in your mind have been like a more appropriate way to deal with that disagreement?
About the tax proposal?
Yeah, or anything else that could come up. I mean, just in general.
Well, with the tax proposal sort of situation, the way that they should have addressed it is they should have just, dealt with the fact that I wrote an opinion piece. And if they had a different view on that, maybe one of them could write an opinion piece, submit it, let the conversation happen. Let both sides get their views out there. I generally think that, the best ideas rise to the top when you allow the conversation or the debate to happen.
Yeah.
And we've got to get away from this thinking. We hear a lot of phrases lately, for instance, that sound really nice. Because it sounds like people getting along. They'll say things like, oh, we have to move forward. We need stability. We need civility. We need consensus. And the board speaks with one voice. But the board isn't necessarily supposed to speak with one voice. The board is supposed to speak with lots of different voices, and then you vote, and then eventually that's the decision, and that's what stands there. But everybody should be allowed to have that conversation ahead of time. And it shouldn't mean that we're just brushing problems under the rug in order to move forward. It shouldn't mean that you're suppressing dissent in order to move forward. Allow everybody's voice to be heard, and then you can vote, and that's how you can move forward after that. So I just think we need actually more respectful debate. We need more critical thinking. We need to just be forthcoming with our community and clear about what we're talking about. And we just have to be willing to engage honestly with people. And so there's different ways you can go about this, and that's what I would do.
So your view would be, more conversation, more voices. And this is another thing that's come up in previous episodes of mine, and just generally something that I kind of kick around that I'm not really sure quite how I feel about it. But, there's also such thing as like too much conversation, right? Where, it's like at some point you do have to get things done. And so where do you think that plays into it? Like, at what point is it like, hey, look, this could be the wrong decision, it could be the right decision, but just somebody needs to make a decision and we need to move on with this to get to the next agenda item or the next business item or whatever the case may be. What do you think about that?
Well, there are mechanisms for that in Robert's Rules, for instance. Once conversation has gone on, we've got, even in our board bylaws and stuff, I think everybody's allowed to speak twice on a concept or on a item for 3 minutes each. And
except for you, apparently.
they do like to make exceptions for me.
You can't speak on certain things.
Right. But I mean, even if we just follow the rules that we have in place in terms of our policies, if we follow Robert's Rules, like, you can call the question in Robert's Rules.
Sure.
And that's actually been a running joke with our board, too, because they call the question like a lot. But yeah, once you bring something to a vote, that's when you move on. Like, after you've voted on it, you've made the decision, then you move on. But prior to the vote, you should be allowed to have the conversation, and you shouldn't wait until the last minute to have it. Like, for the millage, for instance, we should have done what other boards did, where we had a work session about the millage to just discuss it and not vote on it. And then the following meeting, after we digest the information, then we would make the vote. But that didn't happen. With the millage for us, we waited until the very last hour, after all the other districts had, almost all the other districts at least, had already voted on it. So our vote no longer was a deciding factor anymore anyways. Mm-hmm. And we learned about it, talked about it, voted on it, all at the same meeting. And that's the kind of thing that our community members.
So do you, I guess, what do you think there was a strategy behind doing it that way, or do you think it was just done last minute? I mean, do you think it was like something nefarious? I mean, what was do you have any idea what the reasoning behind that was?
I don't want to guess at people's motives, but
sure.
There have been plenty of people who've drawn their own conclusions about that.
Yeah, it's just odd to me that you say, like, well, our votes were relatively innocuous, considering the fact that all these other communities were bought in on it. So it's like, okay, well, if that was really the case, then, I would just question, like, well, why would we do it that way? Was it incompetence, or was it something more, or maybe, maybe that's just the way you guys do things. There's not necessarily anything wrong with doing things in one meeting, I guess. So where do you see the case going? I mean, your lawsuit. Do you have any idea?
Well, I'm hoping that we win. And I'm hoping that it establishes a very good precedent that we should respect First Amendment rights and that we should be willing to have these conversations, because that's really how you best serve students and our community.
Do you think there's a good counter argument to your position that you've heard from the other side on this? I'm always interested in, like, what both sides are saying. So do you think there's been a persuasive, or where you think, like, I could see maybe in a certain context that this would make sense, kind of thing?
For why I should have gotten censured for sharing that information. That's a good question. What's their best argument that they're going to try to make?
Maybe just answer me this. What arguments have they raised?
They believe that what they keep repeating over and over again is that I violated the bylaw. Like, she should have just followed the bylaw. She shouldn't have spoken about this until we gave her permission to speak about it. And because she violated the bylaw, it is right for us to punish her.
Right.
But
the problem, of course, is that if you violate a bylaw that is itself not constitutional or whatever, then, you know what I mean? It's questionable as to whether or not that makes a difference, I suppose.
That's right. I don't think it's the best argument, but I don't know.
That's the main thing that you've heard.
I've learned not to think that you're necessarily going to win, because you never know what a judge is going to decide. So we'll find out.
Yeah, well, you really don't. Let's see. I'm just looking through their affirmative defenses here just to see if there's anything of any interest there. All actions complained of were absolutely or qualifiedly privileged. That's boilerplate, more or less. This is an interesting one. The plaintiff's speech was part of her official duties rather than as a private citizen. I see that more often in the employment context. You're not really an employee, but just so I suppose more for the viewers, there's a principle that you don't give up your right to free speech when you become a public employee. But by virtue of the employment relationship, you sort of have reduced rights in that regard. So if you're an employee and you're speaking out about a matter that directly bears upon your employment, like there's a sense in which you're kind of speaking for the employer. And so the courts have kind of said, well, if it relates to your employment duties, then you have kind of a reduced expectation of being able to just speak freely. And so for that reason, you've got to meet kind of like a heightened standard in order to have that speech protected by the First Amendment. So the courts will kind of go through whether or not, for an employee anyways, the speech was related to official duties or not, and those sorts of things. I actually don't know and would have to do some research as to whether or not that argument holds water with respect to an elected official. My gut says, go ahead, Carol. I see you're lighting up, so go ahead.
Lighting up because I'm just thinking, I see such a big difference between an employee and a board member, because of who we're accountable to. And it all goes back to that, because I am accountable to the community. And I think too often, like I've made this analogy before where I believe that there are board members. This isn't just Rochester either. This is really across all kinds of school boards. Mm-hmm. There are board members who believe that, the superintendent is like the king and board members are like part of his royal court or something.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
What is this, Michigan State University?
Yeah, right. But the board hires the superintendent,
Right.
We're supposed to be checks and balances on behalf of the community. So I was trying to do my service to the community in my official capacity as a board member. But I also made it very clear when I wrote my article, I'm not speaking on behalf of the board. I'm speaking on behalf of myself as an individual board member.
Right. This is so I see two things that are in here that are kind of interesting. So this is, again, the affirmative defenses, so people know, like, you have to, when there's a complaint filed, the defendant has to answer the complaint by either admitting or denying the allegations. And then there's a section of what's called affirmative defenses, which means that as the defendant, if I prove one of these things has occurred, then I'm not liable. And so one of the affirmative defenses in their answer is that the bylaw enacted by defendants set reasonable regulations on conduct of board members and was necessary to maintain confidentiality of sensitive information that is not available to the general public. Carol, Beth, I have an idea that you're going to disagree with that. I do think that it's an interesting argument. It kind of has like a reasonable tone to it. And that's, again, something that I'd need to do a little bit more research on to see if it holds water, like legally speaking, if that's actually a defense or not. And then, of course, they allege here that the information was not available to the general public, which we've heard Carol Beth say that it actually was available to the general public, I suppose. But so that is interesting. And then probably the most interesting thing that I see in here is, where is it? Hold on. A censure is not an unconstitutional suppression of speech. Rather, censure is a form of constitutionally protected speech. So I suppose the argument here would be that first of all, there's such a thing as government speech. So the government can speak and express its own views. That's something that case law has indicated. And then also the other board members theoretically can also express their views and exercise their free speech rights. So I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting defense. Again, you're smiling, so maybe you have a response to that. But any thoughts on those kind of things? I mean, I'm sure you've seen all this stuff already. Yeah,
my response to that one, because I know they cited some other case where an institution censured one of the trustees, and they claimed, that was just them exercising their speech, but there was no punishment attached to that. In my case, They actually did punish me by removing me from committees and my board liaison assignments and stuff. So that's the
not to mention they don't let you talk on certain topics now because of
there's an agenda
so that is kind of an interesting.
I'm supposedly not allowed to say anything.
Yeah. Plaintiff was never prevented from speaking, voting, communicating with constituents or other core aspects of her position as school board trustee. I suppose you would probably disagree with that.
Sorry, will you repeat that one again?
Yeah, plaintiff, that's you, was never prevented from speaking, voting, communicating with constituents or other core aspects of her position as school board trustee. Your reaction?
Well, I'm doing it in spite of their bad rule. But here's a question. would
Sure.
a reasonable person feel prevented by the kinds of tactics that they're using? Because I'm not a normal person at this point.
Yeah, I think there is a First Amendment principle that would suggest that if what you're doing could have a chilling effect on
Right.
free speech and things like that, then yes, that could be a problem as well. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'd be really interested to talk with somebody on the other side of this and kind of explore some of these issues.
Oh, you
because
should
there are-
reach out. Please do.
Oh, they're not going to talk to me. You would think they would talk to me?
No, I don't think so, but at least
I mean, look, just to be honest, I don't blame them for not talking to me, because if I was their attorney, I would probably say, don't talk about the litigation, no comment on pending litigation,
I
all
believe
that
that is
stuff.
what they're being told.
I do
Yeah.
not in any way fault anybody that doesn't want to talk about pending litigation with me.
Fair enough.
You know,
Fair
especially not on my little less than 1,000 follower podcast that we have going on here. But I'm hoping that having Beth Litkouhi on helps me to blow up and sort of grow the channel. So Beth, knowing what I do and how I've kind of done both sides of this and have represented local governments and different things like that, and as well as individuals, do you have any questions that you would pose to like a government attorney or to just attorneys in general about kind of how things work, or anything that's come up that you think like, oh, that's kind of weird?
gosh, that's a good question. I guess I'm curious about your thoughts on this case, and if you think that there's a good chance of it being successful or not, and how that could influence. And let's say I win or I lose, and what kind of effect
Right.
does that have for school boards across Michigan?
Well, so first of all, just as a general point of policy, I mean, it seems to me that you've got a very similar thing going on in Michigan State University. You've got the Rochester Community School District where you've got this type of thing happening. I heard about another college, I think it may have been in Pennsylvania, but I could be totally wrong about that. But there was another college that had a very similar situation to kind of the MSU thing. So these things are happening. And one way or the other, I think we need clarity with respect to what are the rights of elected board members.
Right.
Some of that may turn on what the state constitution grants, and then, of course, the enabling statutes for schools grant. But there is a real First Amendment question here. I mean, I don't even want to say, but gut reaction, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this. Gut reaction is it just doesn't feel right that they can do that. I think I would agree with their position on the censure. If all you're doing is saying, we have no confidence in Beth, or we're censuring her and shame on her, I think that may be characterized as sort of free speech or as government speech. I think where you start losing privileges and benefits of being a board member, such as committee assignments and things like that, that's starting to feel like retaliation for what you've done. But I could just kind of keep going back and forth and ping-ponging on that, because then you also kind of have, well, does the public body sort of as a political animal have the right to say who represents it on these committee assignments? So I could kind of see both sides of that. I don't know that I have like a firm opinion, but I'm definitely curious to see how it turns out. And I suppose gut reaction, it doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I can see a lot of problems if they start to say things like, these elected trustees are not allowed to express opinions that are different from whatever the board decides and that sort of thing. It just seems, how are people supposed to even know like who they might want to reelect or not? If they don't know what kinds of views are being discussed behind the scenes. They don't know who's advocating for their positions or not.
Right. And there's case law, just like in Michigan, for example, that discusses, elected legislators and their sort of unfettered right to speak on public policy issues and things like that. So, I mean, there is some case law like that in Michigan. Maybe it's Sixth Circuit federal. I'm not sure. I can't remember offhand. But, there is case law to that effect that may ultimately favor your position. Yeah, I mean, I'd have to do more research. I think I don't know, now that we've had this conversation, maybe I will write that article about sort of the responsibilities and rights of local local electeds with respect to kind of their public trust and what that means exactly. And then I'm sure a court will rule completely opposite to the position that I've decided to take. So
no, they'll read your article and they'll be like, yes, this makes lots of sense.
Maybe, but what if that article is ultimately concludes that you're wrong, Carol Beth? I don't know.
Oh, then I'll disagree with you. And I'll be about it. I'll write my own article.
So, yes, and the last thing I want to say is this, and I just talked about this in a recent short episode that I did concerning the Michigan Attorney General came out with a press release on there was a kidnapping plot to kidnap the governor at one point, in the COVID era or whatever, and they secured some convictions, and a number of those convictions have been overturned, and one more recently. And so there was this press release, sort of lambasting the Court of Appeals and overturning this conviction and everything. And I've noticed this on social media, especially LinkedIn, with attorneys. And it's not just lay people. I mean, it's definitely attorneys as well. There's this tendency to think that if the court has decided in a way that I agree with, then yes, justice has been secured, and and they got it right this time. Mm-hmm. But when they disagree with you, when they disagree with my position, it's because they're political hacks, or they predetermined the case, or they're just falling in line with wokeism or with whatever. I mean, take your pick on either side of the aisle there, and so I think there is sort of this unfair, double standard, maybe you could say, of hey, when they get it right and I agree with them, oh, that's great, but when they've ruled against me, gosh, I just wish that they believed in the rule of law. Just because somebody disagrees with you, they don't believe in the rule of law, I guess. So there is kind of this trend, it seems to me, going on social media that it really irritates me. And I think, there's no way you can say that the judges aren't influenced. I mean, they're human beings after all, so they definitely are influenced by current events and politics and social pressures and political pressures and things like that. But overall, I think people are generally trying to do a good job. They're trying to get it right, I would say. Maybe that's you. I don't know.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think I would agree with you that I think overall people try to do a good job. I also think sometimes courts probably do get it wrong. So there's probably some kind of balance there.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of times the courts get it wrong, and so that's why you have new cases will come up and they'll overturn previous rulings. I mean,
yeah. In any case, like, what is a better system than what we have, I guess, right?
Well, I don't know that one exists, frankly. I'm not sure what it is either.
Right. So we got to do the best within the systems that we have,
right.
and hope that people who are electing people like judges or school board members are paying attention to who they're voting for and what they stand for.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing that creates a lot of noise in the system is when people are just voting based on name recognition and stuff that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I guess, and I won't go too far into this, and I'm not a political theorist or anything like that, but the federal system of appointed judges for lifetime appointments, and then you've got the state system of electing judges.
Oh, yeah, that's
so
more
they're
like
electing judges, and then they age out at a certain point in time. And I think there's probably benefits and drawbacks to each of those things, because the judges are accountable to the voters, and the voters may choose to vote somebody out of office that made a ruling that was unpopular but correct, right? I mean, following the law. I mean, the judicial branch is limited in what they can do. It's not as though they're not really authorized to create new law. They're supposed to be ruling based on what the existing law is, and they're supposed to craft their ruling within that framework, and it's just interpretations and things like that. So the fact that you may have a Supreme Court, get justice that gets attacked sort of politically on the campaign trail and then voted out of office in favor of somebody else, who's a different level of partisan attorney. I'm not sure that is the best system. It might be. I don't know. There's plenty of flaws in the federal system of appointments too, but this is what we're left with, folks, so we're just going to make the best of it. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was my great pleasure having you. If you do happen to run into maybe one of your fellow board members or, just anybody that's knowledgeable about the topic that wants to have a discussion from the other point of view, I would be happy to have them on. And it would be a really interesting discussion, I'm sure. So I'll throw it out there into the universe. If anybody wants to come on from the other side, I will put a little caveat though. You've got to be like knowledgeable about what's going on and professional and things like that. Because I've had people reach out about different topics, and I'm kind of unclear, like sometimes as to what the qualifications of those folks have been. So, like if you're a qualified person that's in the know about what's going on, and you know either the law on this issue or you're ingrained in the facts, maybe you're the superintendent or a trustee or something, then those are the sorts of people we definitely want to have on for the other side of the issue. So, Carol Beth, thank you.